There are a few topics going on in this chapter, but I'm really going to be focusing on one point in just a moment. In the notes, we're on page 2, point B, dealing with the pursuit of marriage and all things related to it. It doesn't just fit those looking to be married or in the process of it. It deals with relationships in general. This is good for those that are married or those that have any type of relationship with others, especially if it involves some type of commitment. And I think that's one of the things that's missing a great deal from our relationships now, is there's just not that much commitment. Friendships typically are expected, at least as I was younger, we thought this, to have a degree of commitment that you would expect to have. And with that came loyalty, and now it just seems like people jump around in relationships in varying degrees and don't think much of it, and it just seems like there's potentially just the love of novelty and things being different. But point B, and I hope this is obvious, what is the goal when we're just thinking at a high general level of marriage? What is the goal? The goal is a long and solid marriage. One that's long, if God so grants us that, and that it's very solid. In other words, it's going to withstand all types of challenges that will come at it. And if anything, a good marriage, the more challenges and the difficulties of life that come, they should strengthen the marriage. They should draw the couple and push the couple, as it were, closer together, as it would any good friendship that we would have. If we go through it together, then it will be stronger than it ever was before. And it's sad to hear, I still listen to periodically a lot of the Christian psychology shows and counseling shows and things, and they often talk about as though we're just like every other relationship that's out there in Christianity, that one of the things that often makes it hard on a marriage is when they go through some particular point of pain, and that seems to drive them apart. And that ought to be odd to us. It ought to be abnormal, because you're thinking, no, it ought to keep them close to each other. Especially things like that they commonly think one of the things that oftentimes becomes a problem in the marriage and separates the couple is financial struggles. And that, again, shouldn't be something that separates the couple. Of course, a lot of people would say, well, it's because, my husband or my wife just can't control their spending. But you're still going to go through the pressure together. And, if you're thinking, well, if my spouse can't control their spending, and that's why you're angry at them, again, should they control their spending? Yes, it's certainly one thing that could be dealt with. But to think that that's going to be allowed to draw you apart. Many years ago, I had a man come to the office here at the church and came into my office. It was on a weekday, and he came and said, "Can I talk with you?" And he said, "Sure." And he sat down and he just started crying and crying. And I said, "What's up?" He said, I got trouble in my marriage. I don't know what to do. And I'm thinking some major things going on. So he finally got his composure back, and I said, "Well, can you tell me what the issue is? Are you free to tell me that?" "Yeah, I can tell you." He said, "My wife can't stop spending. She just won't stop spending, and I don't know what to do. We're going to go bankrupt, and I don't know what to do." And he just was so upset about the financial irresponsibility of his wife. And then we ended up talking about how, okay, here's some things we might be able to work through. But one thing's for sure, you don't want to go attack your wife as though she's the enemy, because all of us bring some type of weakness to the marriage. That doesn't mean we excuse it and don't deal with it, don't get me wrong. But we deal with it nonetheless, and we face these trials and these struggles together, and they ought to make us stronger. Let's at least step into this at a high level, thinking and presuming that if we're going to go through hardship, they're going to bring us together because we're going through them all together. And if we live to be really, really old and many, many years of marriage, we'll be able to look back and look at all the things that we didn't just suffer, but we suffered together with. We faced together. And we leaned on each other. When one was weak, the other one held them up, and vice versa, and we were supporting each other. And we always knew that even if everybody in the world hated us, that this one person at least would stand with us. And so often that's not there. I've certainly seen and been acquainted with, over my lifetime, plenty of marriage, probably a good majority in my perspective that I've come to know closely, that's one of the fears, that if other people hate me, so will my spouse. That they're one of the ones that clearly doesn't love me anyway. They don't care for me. They don't cherish me. And it just seems to be growing worse and worse, and I think part of it is because there is such a focus on self. I was listening to, it was like a podcast, I think, or something. They all jumble together in my head, so it's hard to give credit because I can never quite remember which one I heard it from. I just remember the content. I throw away the packaging. But I was listening to a presentation, and at some point in there, they were giving some type of overview of the latest list of pronouns that could be out there. And I've heard this before, and it's frustrating, and it's just absolutely absurd. And every time I hear it, especially when they try to illustrate the usages of the variations of these pronouns, I always think of the text in Romans 1, professing themselves to be wise, they became fools. It is utter lunacy to read this stuff, but that's not what I'm getting at. It was the conclusion of this person as they were talking about it, and in frustration, they said something along the lines of, if ever there was a generation openly displaying narcissism, it's this one. I need you, and they put it something like this, I need you to totally change your vocabulary, your use of grammar for me, to recognize me and how I identify as myself, and everyone else needs to change. And again, he was making the point, that is probably one of the most graphic demonstrations of narcissism that we've seen, probably many of us in our lifetime. And yet it's looked upon as being perfectly normal. Well, if I'm going to demand everyone accommodate me, that's a terrible approach to any relationship. What kind of friend would that make? Well, I'm going to be friends with you, but I got a whole list of things you got to qualify for, and I'm going to grade you on them every day. Yes?
I see one guy debating this kind of thing, and he said, if I said that you have to use handsome and intelligent every time you refer to me, that wouldn't fly. I thought that was kind of funny.
Some people would probably say, fine, I'll oblige you. If that's what you want, if that's what you need, and then we're so gracious, we'll give it to you. But we sometimes look on it one way, and then you kind of think, well, wait a minute, what's driving this? That there is such a overwhelming self-focus, and I think it's all over the place. And it's so normal, that's in big quotes, that we just don't think about it. So when we're thinking about marriage, it's so simple to walk into this and think, I hope they love me and they care for me, and I'm walking in and I want into this relationship, and I need you to recognize these things. And at first, this is how you hear a lot of these talks about issues with marriage. At first, it all starts great because we just love each other and we're doing everything for each other. But then your spouse doesn't seem to be thinking about you anymore. And I get so tense when I hear that. Because it's already, if you start the counseling and any acknowledgement that way, it can't turn the right direction. It's going to go wrong. Because we can't walk into those situations and say, all right, what are your needs? And then look at the spouse, aren't you meeting those? And then look at the spouse, what are your needs? And look at the other, aren't you meeting those? Did you know they were there? And you might get to that maybe at the tail end, maybe in a tiny little way, you might actually end up hitting it. But in my perspective, it's going to be rare, because the key to a solid, strong marriage is the one is focused on the needs of the other. And that's what drives us. I'm looking to discover those needs, to know what those needs are, and we're going to go through the 3 key aspects of any relationship. And they're in the order that we're gonna go over them in. And the first one is communication. And then the second one is trust. And then the third is love. And everyone thinks, well, we don't love each other anymore. Well, why don't you? And you get to the nitty-gritty and you find out they don't trust each other anymore. And why don't you trust each other anymore? Because we don't really communicate. In every relationship, we'll pivot and depend upon communication, and that's at the very beginning, and then it's all the way throughout. We can't stop talking. But we've got this narcissistic, that's probably a fairly good word now, that's not an exaggeration. It used to be pretty rare you'd ever use the term narcissist. But we've got people so self-focused on themselves, and it's not a surprise because we've been thinking this way for a long time, and I apologize for using this again, but I think it's illustrative, at least to some degree. I know very, very, very few popular songs, and any of the popular songs I know, I only know a few phrases. And usually I only know those because I don't listen to them. I'm not making a stand on music here. But I only know them because I hear them in stores or, in passing commercials or something. But certainly one that was so popular and people seemed to really like it. And I can't remember the artist, though you probably would laugh because when you hear this, you think, well, I know who's famous for that. But the You Are So Beautiful song, you're everything I hope for, you're everything I need. That song, or is that dating me now? What's that? Yeah, but it was someone else used to sing it quite a bit. What's that?
It's an oldie.
An oldie? Well, thanks, yes. It still seems current in my head, but I don't listen to much anymore. And that's the one that always comes to my mind in thinking, that's what a relationship is. You're beautiful to me. Why? Because you meet me. You fulfill my need. You're everything I desire for me. And that's not what a marriage or any relationship should be based on. So the goal is a long and solid marriage. Number one, a marriage that lasts is built on covenant. It's built on covenant, a covenant, but it's built on covenant vows that both persons take seriously. It's one of the unique parts about marriage, and that I don't typically know too many people in their general friendships they make covenant vows, though there have been friendships like David and Jonathan that were very close, and they covenanted together to be close friends and loyal and obligated themselves. That's why a covenant's done. But marriage is one of those. That's why one of the reasons why I chose the text. This is one that demonstrates the seriousness of a vow. Verse 1 of Ecclesiastes 5, guard your steps as you go to the house of God and draw near to listen rather than to offer the sacrifice of fools. For they do not know they are doing evil. They just do what they do. They don't know it's evil. Do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought. Well, that's pretty restrictive. Don't just talk. Don't be too quick to speak. And certainly don't be too short in your thinking. Be more thorough. So do not be hasty in word or impulsive in thought to bring up a matter in the presence of God, which I think is interesting, too, in light of, this isn't dealing with marriage specifically, but we do oftentimes try to make that point at the beginning of a wedding ceremony. This is in the presence of God. So you're taking with utmost seriousness what you're about to vow. And again, that's just a big point with me, because if Christianity, it's as though we can disregard it because most people do. You made a vow. You made a vow before God, and it's easily, or maybe not easily, but it's dismissed, and we have all these reasons why. But that's to truly mistreat the whole concept of what a vow is. For God is in heaven, and you are on the earth, therefore let your words be few. So be careful about these commitments, these words. For the dream comes through much effort. A lot of work brings about, most people think this is referencing erratic, odd dreams. And the voice of a fool through many words, so you're working yourself to a weariness, can affect your dreams. And a fool, if he keeps, one of the ways you'll know it, his foolishness will come out because he uses a lot of words. So, with this in mind about the seriousness of your speech, your commitments, when you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Now that's an interesting categorization of people who vow to God and then just don't ever get around to it. Don't get around to their commitments that they make before God. And again, when I grew up, it was not uncommon for people to encourage, you probably want to commit to God. Even to some degree, some would say, if you really want to box yourself in, you're going to try to vow. Now, that's a dangerous thing. Make a vow before God, because you're supposed to treat that with utmost seriousness. If I vow to God, there is no way out. No way out. I am permanently looking to box myself in, so don't do that foolishly. Vows were taken so serious that there's even some part of the law where if a daughter makes a vow and her father thinks it was rash or not wise, he can get her out of the vow. That was the only exception I know of. Young men, you made a vow, too bad. You were stuck, nobody could get you out of it. But that was how serious it was. But when you make a vow to God, do not be late in paying it, for he takes no delight in fools. Pay what you vow. Even if it's hurtful, even if it's painful, fulfill your vows. It is better that you should not vow than that you should vow and not pay. So do not let your speech cause you to sin, and do not say in the presence of the messenger of God that it was a mistake. I think that's interesting because you've got a lot of parallels here with a wedding ceremony. This is, again, not dealing specifically with a wedding ceremony, but that's part of it. To go before the messenger of God, the one who's standing, as it were, in the place of representing what God or God's word says, and you say, it was a mistake. How often does that come up? People trying to get out of their wedding vows. It was a mistake. They didn't take it serious. There's a lot of people that before they'll buy a car, they'll look it over thoroughly because they realize I'm making a pretty major commitment here. I don't want to be foolish in it. Or a house, even that's hard to say now. People will buy a house without giving it much consideration. But you look these things over because you realize this is a pretty serious commitment. I ought to at least give it a lot of thought. And it seems like lately, when it comes to the relationships between a guy and a girl and ultimately potentially resulting in marriage, that there's not a great deal of thought. Do you love each other? Great, then just get married. And then everyone loves to point out, Don, you take this too serious, and I got this friends over here, these relatives of mine, they met each other, and 2 weeks later they were married, and it's just been a great marriage. And I just don't like when people love to take very, very rare instances and try to make them a norm, as though it's a good standard to look at. Well, that's not typical. It just isn't. Most of the time with any relationship, it's going to take deliberate, thorough investment. And we walk into the potential of being married with that sobriety, at least. So point A, underneath number 1, their marriage that lasts is built on covenant vows. Point A, this means that both should be expected to demonstrate themselves as trustworthy and faithful before they come to take the marriage vows. That should go without saying, but I think it needs to be said. You're making a vow. Have you really thought through it? Do you know the person's trustworthy? Of course, they love me. That's not enough. Not enough evidence. Not enough input. Is the person trustworthy? Are they reliable? You're about to commit your life to someone that you're going to go through not just the beautiful times together, you're going to go through some of the roughest times together, the most difficult times together, some of the scariest things together. Can you trust this person? And there's a multitude of things. We oftentimes think, well, can you trust them? Will they be unfaithful to me? And that's certainly one thing to consider. But there's so many other things. You might have someone that's faithful to you and never looks on another man or a woman or whatever and considers leaving the marriage, but they're not trustworthy in other areas. I mentioned the stress of financial situations. That's kind of nice to know. How do they handle money before we get married? I like to try to deal with some of these things in premarital counseling. How are you going to handle discipline? Who is going to handle the money? Who's going to pay the bills? What do you think your schedule is going to be like with each other? What's your day-to-day going to be like? What if you differ on the purchase of a car? How are you going to figure out what a house is? I mean, what are you going to do? It's so easy for them to say, I'll just defer to them. I'll just defer to them. No, think through these things. Try to imagine some of these things, because a lot of these things that we don't anticipate come up, and then you start to realize, I thought I could trust you. I thought I could. There's more to it that we'll get to in a moment. But we should know this before marriage vows are made. Off to the left, courtship should be designed to prepare for exclusive commitments to each other. That's exactly what it is. I'm about to commit myself to you. This is one of the other warning signs I see in potential marriages is where I'm about to commit to you. But one thing's for sure, once we're married, you'll have your friends and I'll have my friends. And I just think that that's a red flag. That's just a red flag. I don't doubt that to some degree we'll still have some friends that every once in a while we'll spend some time with, and potentially the spouse would too, but as a norm, as the general rule, you two prefer to be with each other as much as possible, and would prefer to be each other's best friend from there on out. That's the way it ought to be. This is why I'm a little nervous about just everyone focusing on the romance. Romance can be emotionally motivated, even just physically prompted and motivated. But are you really friends? Are you marrying a friend? That's going to take a bit of time. You're going to, do I know the person's personality? Are they trustworthy? What do you like? What do I like? Do we look like we're a good balance for each other? And this is why it's actually kind of nice to be able to spot ahead of time some of the weaknesses in the other. Might we be a balance to one another in some of these things? Might I build you and you'll build me? Those types of things. Can we actually see it? People put a smile on their face sometimes and just say, oh, love is blind. Not really. Actually, you start to realize genuine love when genuine love can see what's really there. What's really there. Because we all bring difficulties and problems into it. No matter how nice we think we are, what a catch we think we are. Actually, if we think that, we're probably already headed for trouble. So courtship should be designed to prepare for exclusive commitments to each other by keeping their present commitments to God and their parents or other authorities. This is a good thing to look for. Like for a man, are you a man under authority? Are you a man who's responsible in the commitments and the responsibilities he has in his life? Are you that way? For the young woman, are you under authority? Are you obedient? Do you follow the instructions that you're given? Are you faithful to the commitments you've made in other areas? I need to find this out. This is part of what this courtship time ought to be. Point B, much of the modern approach to dating seeks to stretch the limits of what they are supposed to avoid, usually in the physical realm. This is frustrating me to no end because people are just downplaying it. How dare you say that they shouldn't be physically active? I think that's just normal. They're going to do it. Just let them do it and don't worry about it. Encourage it. No. This is not what we're looking to encourage. Usually it's physical and seeks to emphasize, sadly, independence prematurely. There will be independence. But let's be careful about this whole concept of independence. We just can't wait to get married so we can be on our own and independent. Oh no, you'll be, to some degree, dependent on each other. Again, this is one of the danger signs of anyone in life where I want to be my own boss. I'm driven to find a way to be my own boss, out from under anyone bossing me around. That's never a good goal in life. And fortunately, God has always made it that sooner or later we're going to come back to realize somebody's going to be my boss, someone's going to be my authority, I'm always going to be accountable, I'll never get past it. I just as well rest in it, in the reality of it. But this oftentimes with a young couple, they'll get together and say, we can't wait to get married so we can get out of this mess. And their families might be a mess. But we've got to be very careful that that's not communicating a lack of the ability to stay committed and to be a person who's truly under authority and a person who's responsible. Point C, if the aim is physical, and so often it is, even they'll deny it, if the aim is physical, the marriage won't last beyond the natural effects of age. It won't last well because we just don't typically get much better looking. And there's where attraction, you start to, as you mature even more and more, you start to realize, as I've dealt with this already, there are other things that you start to realize that's even more attractive. And hopefully, We spotted that long before we were just focused on the physical. I love your personality. I love you. I truly like you, the real you. And that is something that truly is what holds you together. Because if it's just based on the physical, the marriage won't last beyond the natural effects of age. True friendships have common goals and enjoy each other's company. Is that a novel thought? Well, we used to enjoy each other's company. Well, what changed? And typically it's, well, they did. And I think if you really could water down a lot of the complaints, that at least I know I have seen that have come up, and this doesn't sound very good because it doesn't sound very legitimate as a reason to separate, but we get bored. We just get bored. And boredom, as I've stressed multiple times over, is a very dangerous thing. It is so telling to character, our character, how we handle boredom. Because it's going to come. So if you're bored in your marriage, and our society and even in Christian circles have all these answers that are all based, in my opinion, on pretty much the wrong stuff. Pretty much the wrong stuff to make your marriage more interesting and more fun. No, I'd like to go back, rather than just looking on that, especially on the physical side, and you say, well, if you were just friends and you were married and you wanted your relationship to be more interesting, what might you want in it? With just a friend, any kind of just general friend. Well, I suppose we'd want to kind of explore our common interests. And maybe your interest versus my interest, and trying to expand our knowledge base and some of the other things that we're pursuing as far as what I'd like to be improved in, and just all kinds of other things. I'm just speaking in horrible generalities right now, but just some way to keep the relationship, the discussion, the thoughts, the camaraderie all building and growing, especially Christians, because we do have something regardless of how interesting our personality is. It always frustrates me. He's such a boring guy, or she's just not an interesting person anymore. And we get to this nonsensical, yeah, but you're both Christians. You both serve the God of the universe. You're both headed toward ultimately standing before God. There's lots of things you could be focused on, growing together. And imagine the thought that possibly God, in his infinite wisdom, brought two weak people together into marriage so that you both could be building on each other's strengths and responding correctly to each other's weakness, that God actually knew this, rather than you saying, I don't know, it was a mistake, I don't know why God put us together, we aren't compatible. That's why the Lord reemphasized, what God has joined together, let not man divide. Period. Ever. Because it's God's doing, even if we don't like what we think he ended up doing on the other side. So we enjoy each other's company. These are foundational to lasting friendships that will hold up till one's dying days. It's an odd, how do I say this without sounding insensitive? It's an odd point of feeling almost overwhelmed on the inside for me, thrilled, when you see someone who's been married a long time and you see the pain of the separation. And I don't mean I'm just sad that they died, or I don't know how I'm going to get along financially anymore. I don't mean things like that. I just mean you realize this person has just lost their closest friend in the world. And you see that pain. That's why I didn't want to sound insensitive. But in one sense, that is so, so precious to see. And maybe for me it's precious to see because it seems like we're just not seeing much of that anymore. Where you almost get this notion that if their spouse died, they'd grieve because it's only proper. But they wouldn't really be that sad. That's such a sad thing. It's a sad thing. I used to love when my family would talk about my great-grandparents on my dad's side. And they always used to love this, and I barely knew them, Frank and Anna Lambert. But I used to hear it, and they said that when they would talk about them, oh, they dearly loved each other. Dearly loved each other. They were in love their whole lives, all the way up in their, about the early 80s or late 70s or something like that. And then they would always end it when they were talking about, reminiscing about my great-grandparents, and they would say, Fred died, he'd kind of lost his mind toward the end, but she cared for him the whole time. So sweet, so selfless. And then 2 weeks later, she died. And they would always say, she died of a broken heart. And I remember everyone just would smile when they would say it. She died of a broken heart. She just couldn't imagine life without him anymore. And you think, well, that's so, I don't know if that was the case. There was probably some medical reason why she died. But you look on that and people love to think that that actually could still exist, that they could be so close, that there would be almost a pain so intense in losing that person that you couldn't live. I'm not talking suicide, but you just die. Some people, of course, live many years after, and it doesn't mean that they didn't have a good relationship. Of course not. But I could just tell how we love to look on those concepts and how special that is. And then you look at couples that just bicker all the time and argue all the time, and they irritate each other all the time, and they can barely stand each other. And you think, oh, it's just so sad to see. So sad to see. Where you're thinking, you're married, and I'm glad you honor the covenant. That's a very good thing. But, to see a closeness that's there. So that others would look on and say, if I ever get married, that's what I want. I want to marry my best friend. And I don't want to just say it. I want in private we both realize, yeah, we're best friends. Rather than just putting on some act. That we like to be with each other. We're comfortable with each other. We prefer to be with each other. We're probably not very good socialites anymore because we're just, kind of more interested in each other. And aren't looking to go out and impress other people. All I want to do is impress my wife. That's what a husband ought to do. And keep her interest and have her think I'm the best guy ever. I don't want to lose that. I don't want to lose that she really is impressed with me. And that she would hope that would be what I would be. So I'm just thinking, boy, I'm the most fortunate guy ever that she married me. I don't lose sight of that. I don't care how many years we've been married. That I just realize I am so fortunate. That's kind of generally it ought to be, but it doesn't just happen. Now, some people, I don't know, remember that couple I talked about? 2 weeks later, they married each other, were madly in love for their run out. Let's not use that as a standard because that rarely happens. That's why people love to point to it. And then they get married and find out the other person's just not crazy about them. And then we're at odds and we're fighting all the time. I still remember a couple that after they got married, they were lots of trouble early on. And I was delving a little bit more into it, as cautiously as I could, and found out that before they got married, they were fighting a lot, arguing a lot. And someone made the comment, I don't know if I did or whatever, well, that's not good. And the person said, well, at least they were talking. How do we get to these, especially in Christian circles? Especially in Christians, how do we get here? That we would be so flippant in the area of something so serious. Keep having all these stories. We're never going to get anywhere, are we? Point D, if either members of the prospective couple cannot be found trustworthy and cannot be found consistent in their temperament and obligations, they certainly should not be trusted to keep their marriage vows. You want to know this ahead of time. Do they have a temper? How do they respond to difficulties? How do they respond to sadness, to struggles, to difficult times, to disappointments in themselves? I want to know these things before we get married, as much as I can, rather than getting into the marriage and then being surprised later. Why? This is essential to know. Here's that very important preposition again. This is essential to know before marriage. I almost embarrassed to say some of these things. It's almost like, come on, Don, I thought we were going to get something deep out of this. This is obvious. Well, apparently it's not. Apparently it's not. We're so in love, we didn't see anything. Well, it's not love, and it wasn't wise, and it was like a fool committing themselves irresponsibly. That's not at all what we want. That's why off to the left there, far too often it is heard in broken and troubled marriages that, quote, this isn't the person I married. Well, this is the person you married. You just didn't know it. That's not a kind, gracious way of coming at it. I don't think I've ever said it that way, but that's the way it could bluntly be stated. Now, actually, this is the person you're married. You just didn't investigate. You didn't look for it. And then please, look at yourself. What have you brought to the marriage? What if God in his infinite wisdom brought you into a marriage and your spouse has more needs, let's just say objectively, has more needs than you? They have more areas they need to grow in. They're struggling more than you. Is there a problem with that? See, this is where we get off on the wrong foot already. Well, I suppose it shouldn't be. We act as though, no, it has to be 50-50. I bring 50% of the troubles, they bring 50% of the troubles. It doesn't work that way. Plus, the troubles you bring are always magnified in my eyes, and the troubles I bring, they're not that big a deal. I mean, isn't that typically how we look on these things? This is just human nature. Let's be honest about ourselves as well when we're walking into this. I realize one of the things I'm nervous about is this person marrying me. Let me be conscientious of it, rather than I wonder if I'm going to get a good catch here. If it's going to be good, I sure hope I look out on this one. Well, what am I bringing to the marriage? Maybe the marriage might be improved and might be strengthened and might end up being good because I'm honest about my responsibilities. And I walk into this as someone who says, I'm looking forward to getting married, and I know there's a lot of benefits that come with it, and I'm excited about it, but I'm coming to this committed and dedicated and focused. I'm going to be the best spouse in the world. I don't know who's going to measure that, but still, that's my objective. I'm going to be the best husband ever. And a wife walking into this, I'm going to be the best wife ever, rather than saying, wait a minute, I see that. I'm going to be the best husband ever. Wait a minute, let me look at that. There's like a little asterisk in the upper right-hand corner. I wonder what that means. Oh, that probably means there's some type of footnote. And then we go down to the bottom of this fictitious page, and we find there's a condition. I'll be the best husband ever if my wife is the best wife ever. And again, this is not wise thinking. So hopefully everyone here is thinking, okay, it's obvious. But again, I would make the case based upon the divorce rates and even the ones that are still married that are having so much trouble, it's not nearly as obvious. And maybe we should spend some more time and effort in being truly deliberate in these things long before we ever get married. So oftentimes we'll say, this isn't the person I married. If ever research and investigation is needed, it is before marriage. This is why I'm not just thinking, well, I just want to keep looking and seeing if they like me or whatever. We check with our friends and other resources and people. We ought to be checking around the research, the investigation, and part of this will be, checking with others. So-and-so and I are kind of interested in each other. What do you think about them? Oh, he's so good looking. No, that's not what we're after. I can see that. Or she's very attractive. No, people can see that. But what do you know about them? Have you ever thought about actually going to the most nerve-wracking group of all, or couple of all, and that's their parents? Imagine that, talking to their parents about somebody. What are they like? What are their weaknesses? What are their strengths? What should we be looking for? Is that a mean thing to do? No, it's not mean. Now, if you've got vindictive parents, then we'll pity you, and hopefully we'll listen to it, and see past any vindictiveness. But truly, trying to research, go to their friends. What are they like? Having your friends help you investigate this. What are they like? We're going to pry. We're going to spy. We're going to be looking for these things. Why? Because it's such a serious commitment. It's so serious. Make like, well, I think that would just be inappropriate. No, it wouldn't be. Even these days, it only costs you like $10 to do a police background check. If you don't know them that well, it might not hurt to check on these things and to see. And then, sometimes people have some bad things in their past and they will bring them up. And you want those things to be brought up. And here's where I'm at. Here's where I was. Here's other things. And we kind of build this camaraderie even before we get married by, here's some of the things I've really struggled with. Here's some of the weaknesses I've had. And they sharing. And we're both then working to build each other up. That also draws us together in what we talked about last week, that oneness of spirit that we have. And suddenly we start to grow even closer in oneness of spirit. And then the physical aspect that oftentimes is the number one thing starts to become secondary. Because wait a minute, I start to realize I found this person attractive and I'm very interested and I'm glad they like me and this is kind of novel and this is kind of fun. But I really think I like this person. I like their personality. I like their priorities. I like how they interact with other people. I did start to discover that and get even more interested in Tammy as I got to know her more and started to find out she was genuine, find out about her past, talk about going to school, what our families were like, what our churches were like, what we were involved in, what we thought about Scripture, what we were working on, what we were praying about. And that grew over those 4 years that we dated or courted. Point E, fighting and arguing at its core is most often based on mistrust and should be a warning sign that the couple are not practically, quote, compatible, or at least not at this point. This point is not designed to encourage several breakups in the pursuit of a spouse. There will be disagreements, but how do you handle them? That's key. But is designed to stress that it is better to know this before the two have vowed their commitment to each other before God, because often left arguing can also reveal a focus on self. Most often that's exactly what it's revealing, a focus on self. That's why my attitude engages real quick. You have offended me. You have let me down. And the point isn't the rightness or wrongness of it. The point is it has bothered me. And people then take this into marriages. And that's why then you'll get into a marriage relationship that's always on edge, this fighting one another because you constantly bother me. You irritate me. You let me down. Well, wait a minute. What's the standard here? You bother me. You irritate me. You let me down. Seems like my expectations are part of the issue here. And that, I think, is absolutely true. So point number 2, a marriage or relationship that is truly solid actually does not fear difficulty because of their trust in each other. If I'm going to go through a storm, I want to go with it with you. It's a general way of thinking at it. If I'm going to go through a hard time in life, I'm going to face it with you. If you're big into eschatology, last things, if I'm going to face the end of the world, I want to face it with you. To start somewhere. If I'm going to suffer with some horrible physical ailment or cancer or whatever, I would want to have you there. Or if you're going to suffer with it, I would want to be the one there to help you through it, all the way through. We're going to face, in any marriage, you're going to face the most difficult, pretty much assuredly, thing that you're ever going to face in life together. It's one of the benefits. It's another benefit of having a good family then that comes out of that. A good family then can be there to face it together. But so often now, families are the cause of the biggest troubles and stresses we have in life. That is so sad. It's so sad. Rather than the home and the family being a treat, it's a point of regular stress. And that's just a sad commentary on things. Rather than thinking, well, at least I can come home. At least I have my family. At least I have my siblings, cousins, aunts, uncles, who knows what. A good, close family that's genuinely close. Not the family that says, well, we're close because we're genetically related, and I'll fight to the nth degree for you, but we are on the same page. No, it's our commonness of goal, not just our commonness of genetics. Our commonness of purpose, not just that we came from the same parents or grandparents or something like that. Point A, as hardships arise, a couple that can depend on each other faces them together, and are not apt to turn on each other in their pain and frustration because we're facing it together. How can I turn on my best friend? Then the next time hardship comes, I need you there. I want you there. When you face it, I want to be there. I want you to lean on me. This is what's puzzled me about some husbands that I've talked with at length. Their wives are going through hard times, and we're more than happy to let the wife go off to their friends or some other person or the pastor or someone. Let them find solace there and comfort there. Aren't you jealous of that? Don't you want her to lean on you? Of course, a lot of times you're thinking, well, I'm the one that she's running to other people from. Rather than this, no, we're close friends, and I want it to always be that way. And when we face these hard times, I'm going to lean on you, you're going to lean on me, and we both know we're going to do it. We don't resent it. Imagine the husband who would say, I've got so many stresses, and my wife, she's leaning on me with a difficulty. I resent that. Well, that'd be a terrible thing to say. And vice versa. Of course we lean on each other. It's part of the privileged responsibility we have. We face these pressures together. And then if I find out I am of stress or a point of stress, I want to work. I don't want that to be the case. I want to be an encouragement. And then the spouse wants to be an encouragement back. That's what we're both driven to do. Both trying to be the best for the other, trying to give as little thought to our own, quote, needs in this. That if anything, I have a need to meet their need. That's what I'm driven by. That's my need. And then you got these seemingly well-meaning friends. You got to take care of yourself. I just think you're neglecting yourself, spending too much time on the focus of that other person. Terrible friends. Friends in quotes that come and do them. What better thing could we look to than to spend ourselves on the friendship and love and relationship of our spouse? If I'm going to run myself ragged, wear down my health, so be it. What a great investment to spend our lives on. But we act like now, that's just asking too much. I have goals and aspirations too. Well, too bad if they're already misdirected. That's hopefully your goal and aspirations are directed towards your spouse primarily. That's why, again, it's used of our relationship with the Lord Jesus Christ. I look to be a good spouse as far as that illustration is concerned. Point B, a solid relationship is seen when two can lean on each other and expect it. They can lean on each other and expect it. I'm not going to resent it when my wife relies upon me. I might struggle with it because I'm facing my own pressures, but I realize I'm not allowed to do this. I like to think of this. What will it cost me if I turn my focus inward and only think about my needs? Now, I'll be honest, I've been guilty of that in the past. Probably not too distant past. I turn my focus inward, I just finally yield and I allow the focus to turn inward. And then this should then increase your gratefulness even more for your spouse. They even saw past that. They put up with that. What a fortunate person I am. That's how we ought to come at it. Rather than this, my needs aren't met, or I'm just embarrassed, or whatever, they don't take care of me, or whatever, me. And we think that's normal. And then you get Christian psychologists and Christian books on relationships. Your needs need to be met. How your spouse needs to meet. Yeah, you probably should do that. But you've got to focus on yourself now. If they're not meeting your needs, if they're not sensitive, have them go to counseling so they can meet your needs. We've got it all wrong in Christian circles. It may work in the superficial, to some degree, superficially. It may work in superficial relationships, but it's not to the core. Where my wife or the husband knows each other better than anybody else in the world. And it's all the weaknesses, all the struggles, all the things that aren't so nice. And yet, nothing will separate us. That's what true friendship's about. At its core, off to the left, typically, something that is solid was made so over a period of time, and it wasn't typically made solid quickly. So it should be expected that the pre-marriage relationship should be given plenty of time to solidify the relationship. People love to talk about whirlwind romances. I don't think that's a good rule of thumb because of what we're doing, what we're committing to. A lot of people will, after a bad choice in marriage, bad numbers, they didn't approach it well, can work on it later. And it may come around, but it typically doesn't. It typically doesn't. But we don't want that to be the rule of thumb. So, point C, both have developed a trust in each other and allow themselves. You ever thought about this in a marriage? You allow yourselves to become interdependent. This is one thing, too, that jumped out at me in marriage counseling over the years, even learning something then about my own, that there is a scariness to become dependent on somebody else. It's kind of intimidating. This is what it's intimidating about giving your heart, as it were, over to someone else. I'm a little nervous because they can hurt it. A wife can deeply hurt a husband. A husband can deeply hurt his wife because we are so incredibly vulnerable. We've opened up. We've learned a lot about each other. If you've been married any length of time, you are about as vulnerable in a relationship as you can ever be. That's why I think it is extra, extra wicked to turn on each other and backbite each other, especially after the fact, and use that privileged information to stab them as much as you can. That is wicked. I can't think of another way to say it. It's just cruel. But we look on, well, it's understandable. Why? Because their needs weren't being met. Did I pull out the narcissist word again there? Again, it seems like it's becoming more and more applicable. That life is about me, and all I need to do is marry the person who lives for me. Wait a minute. Odds are you're going to marry a person who wants you to live for them. And we're not here to enforce it on each other. We're here to enforce it on ourselves for the other. So, we allow ourselves to become interdependent. Marriage is not a place to seek out independence from the spouse. We are joined together for life, and let's hope we don't say that through clenched teeth. Let's hope we say that with all sincerity and a pleasantness and a happiness in us that says, we are joined together for life. And it wasn't just because, oh, we're so glad because we both just lucked out and had just great personalities. We're just naturally nice people. None of us, even the best of us, is not just a naturally nice person. You see a good marriage, we all must realize a lot of work has gone into it. A lot of work on each other's part. That's what made it close. That's what made it good, practically speaking. Of course, the grace of God overall. So it's good to, point D, it's good for each other to see the other face stressful situations ahead of time. Realizing that pressure has a way of revealing what's really on the inside, and we need to see it. If ever you're going to spend time scrutinizing your potential spouse, do it before you're married, not after. Do it before you're married, not after. Do I really see weaknesses there? Do I see things that might be irritating? I want to see them now. There's where I'm going to scrutinize my potential spouse, because after we're married, I'm not going to do that anymore, because then my priorities will be all mixed up. I'm here to now be the best person myself in this marriage, not putting expectations on the other. That's why I think it's interesting when we deal with texts like Ephesians 5, nowhere does it tell the husband to make his wife submit. It tells the wife to submit as to the Lord before God. Should a wife submit to her husband? Absolutely. But nowhere will the husband see in his job description as husband, make your wife submit. What is the husband's job description? Love your wife. Cherish your wife. Give yourself for her. That's what you're here for. That's what you're in this marriage for. Not to get out of it what you can. Not to have your needs met. I mean, after all, we all have our needs. No, you're here to give yourself for her. That's what you live for. Next week, we'll pick up even more. I can't believe how fast that went by. Keeping focus on the requirements. So what we're building and what we're working with to build it, and I will deal with a three-point outline that has been very important to me. We will have a lot more text moving forward to support a great deal of this, but I learned it early on as a teenager, and it's stuck in my head, and I'm so glad I heard it. And my dad was talking about relationship. Just always remember, almost in passing at times, a relationship is built on three things in this order. Every relationship, but especially when we're dealing with marriage relationships, we're focused on this. Communication is priority. It is number one. You don't have communication, you don't have a relationship. Really, you communicate, and that's in-depth communication. That's honest, open communication. That's thorough, consistent communication. So you start early on. It's always wearisome when you hear these people that say, well, that person just talks and talks and talks. Maybe they do, but utilize that. Better than just sitting around thinking, looking into each other's eyes with nothing being said. Say something, talk. Learn each other's hearts. There'll be time to gaze into each other's eyes. That'll be a good thing, especially when you know, I know the person inside of there. And I love them even more. And that's what we're looking to have in this. And then when you communicate thoroughly, honestly, consistently, then you develop the second most important thing in any relationship, and that is trust. In keeping it going, you trust each other. I trust you. You can trust me. We both know, even with our flaws, even with our inconsistencies, even if distractions of some type come up, you know my heart. You know me. This is the real me. And that's what you know. And that's what you trust. Not, well, I don't think they're always consistent, or every once in a while they seem to slip up and not being as loving. No, we're not thinking about that. I trust you. And that's maintained as we continue to communicate. And if we continue to communicate and our trust builds and gets solid, then we actually reach love, which is the third. Then we actually love each other. This is why you get these people today that say, I saw her or I saw him and it was love at first. We are in love. You don't even know them. You don't even know the person. Don't throw around the word love. Love takes a bit to get to. Then you finally get there and you realize, okay, we talk all the time. We're building in trust and we love each other. And what happens when you truly love each other? You want to talk more. And look at that. Look at what a cycle has started there. I want to talk more. And we talk more. And I trust even more. And as I trust even more, my love is even stronger. It goes to degrees I never anticipated. And I start to understand what love is. And it's way more than an emotion, though the emotions certainly come. And then I want to talk even more. And it's something that should be pleasant to us. I don't know if I should share this or not, but I'm going to. If it's a groaner, you can cut it out. But it's funny how it hit me at one time. I was in a district manager meeting a couple years ago, and I detest icebreaker things. You know what they mean. You know, you're trying to warm up the crowd and get everybody, and they just come up with these silly things. And they were going to do an icebreaker, and oh, no. And of course, I had to do it. So they had this deal where they threw this ball across the room, and you'd catch it, and whatever your eyes first landed on that question or whatever, that's the one you had to answer. That's the worst scenario because you don't get to think about it. So they were throwing it around, and they threw it to me, and I came and I dropped the ball, which was embarrassing to start with. Came to me, kind of knocked around, fell down. You are with us, like 30, 40 people there. I already look like an idiot. Pick it up. My eyes drop on something, and it said, "What is your favorite sound?" And I thought for a moment, and then it hit me. And I said it sincerely. And then I said it without giving much thought, and almost the entire room was women. And they went, "Oh." And I realized what I just said. I meant it, though, and I sincerely mean it. And when they said, "What is your favorite sound?" and I said, "The sound of my wife's voice." I love the sound of her voice. I love hearing her on the phone. I like just the way she sounds, even the way she laughs. She's got a funny laugh. But I like to hear her voice. She has a beautiful voice. And maybe it's truly, objectively, a beautiful voice. I like to think that. But it is particularly beautiful to me. I love to hear her voice. And I got to thinking more about it, that's, I suppose, what we ought to have, or we ought to be striving for, because what would the opposite be? I'd imagine if I said that in a group of men, they would have all laughed and groaned. I don't know that, but they wouldn't have said "aw," but probably would have groaned or whatever, because so often it's like men, the last thing they do want to hear is their wife's voice. And I don't think it's because I'm just a super good guy. It's because of Tammy. And she is my best friend, and she is so loyal, and I trust her completely in our friendship. And so when I am under stress, which is quite often, sometimes I just like to talk and bring it up to her, just, how's it going? What are you doing today? What do we have for supper? Just to hear the voice. That's a good thing. That's something that I suppose we don't have that often. And we definitely want to build it as we grow in our relationships with our spouse. So that it's a wonderful thing. So that even when we're old and ugly, we don't have to be ugly, but come on, let's be honest. When we get old and ugly, that we are truly, truly the example of a couple that loves one another. That's what we're working for. It's not an easy thing necessarily. It's not something that just comes natural. So that's why we're dealing with all these things up front, so that we come into it with intelligence and direction and purpose to have this as our end goal. So we'll build on that 3 steps to any relationship next week. That is probably the most important part of this entire study. So if you want to fog out the rest of the study after that, okay, you probably shouldn't, but you can. But next week, that'll be the most important part of this whole thing. Let's pray. Father, we do thank you that you are the perfect demonstration of a relationship, especially in the sending of our Lord Jesus Christ, and then the indwelling of your Holy Spirit within us, the communication that you have placed out there in great detail, and then allowing us, encouraging us, prompting us, even by your Spirit, to pray and communicate with you, the undying, lifelong trust that we can have as you've demonstrated in what you've communicated to us, what you are, who you are, and what we have growing in us, this deep, undying love then, because you have loved us. Please, Father, let us be those who strive for this type of relationship in marriage, to improve what we have in our friendships, and then as we're dealing with now, in the pursuit of a marriage relationship, if you would so have it for us. This we ask in Jesus' name, amen.